Welcome to GreenTech, choosing and using sustainable and ethical tools. My name is Jen McFarland, and I'm the founder of Merit Digital, which is a company that seeks to help small businesses with their technology challenges. But we also aim to do that with the perspective of being environmentally friendly, socially conscious, and generally trying to provide a better world. So this course is about having those considerations in mind with respect to your technology. So to begin, we're going to be talking about the impacts, looking at the numbers behind the data behind what the impacts of digital decision making, and then understanding how that is impacting our world. Um, we're also going to look at the biggest culprits in creating large amounts of greenhouse gases and look at the ethical considerations as well for our purchase decisions. We'll talk some about a framework of how you can make those decisions and then how you can begin to work to make changes if you'd like to improve or change your processes. So to begin, more than 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from what's called the information communication technology. And that's a conservative impact. There's some estimates that are quite a bit higher, and it's obviously likely that this is going to continue to grow with the enlarged capacity of AI that we've seen emerge in the last year or two and continue to extend. Enterprise technology specifically, so the business technologies we use are responsible for 350 to 400 megatons. And again, this is a conservative estimate that's even a couple of years old at this point, but this equates to about 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see where the technology sector is responsible for a great deal, and businesses are responsible for obviously a great portion of that. The estimates are that by 2030, data centers are projected to consume 9% of all electricity. And again, that's a conservative estimate that is likely to continue to grow with the advent of AI. So when we're talking about sustainable tech, what do we mean? We're talking about the tools and platforms that ideally are going to minimize negative impact on the environment while also enhancing social and economic benefits. So we're looking to be holistically beneficial here. And then the other side of this coin is ethical tech, which is trying to identify the tools and platforms that provide fair and equal access to their users and to their employees through clear communication, responsible distribution, and ethical business practices. The Sustainable Web Manifesto is, and this a link to this is in our resources at the end, but this is sort of one good way to begin to look for not just your website to be the goal, but also for your technology in general, that the digital decisions that you're making are clean, that they are using renewable energy, that they're efficient, so using the least possible amount of energy, that they're open with accessible and functionally transparent practices that your customers can understand, that you're honest, that you're seeking to be regenerative and support an economy that nourishes users and the planet, and that it's resilient. So thinking about function in times and places where people need it most, trying to make sure that our tools are available at all times. So let's look at some of the data that is behind this information. When we are talking about our greenhouse gas emissions, we're typically looking at a protocol standard used across countries and industries for carbon accounting. And this standard is something that allows us to understand our impact, but also to compare the companies and the countries that are creating greenhouse gases. So this is going to let us seek to find areas for improvement and collaboration and make informed decisions and contribute by impact, by industry, by country again, et cetera. And it's key to remember that this is something that is only going to work as long as we continue to share our impact, which is something that we'll talk about as we move along, the importance of sharing our data. So when we're talking about our emissions, this protocol has three scopes for emissions. The first is direct emissions. So this is the fuel or the company vehicles or manufacturing. If your company is in manufacturing, the direct emissions caused by your organization and your products or services. Scope two is indirect emissions. So that's your organization as part of doing business, the electricity, office heating and cooling, other things that are a sort of a side effect of doing business. And then finally, scope three emissions are all other indirect emissions that come from doing business and from your supply chain. And this can be quite an extensive list. So when we're looking at scope three emissions, we're looking at both upstream and downstream emissions. So these mean the things that are incurred during the production of your products or your surface development, or downstream emissions are anything that's created from the use and disposal of your products and services. And to help us scope this a little bit better for our digital discussion, we're looking at these digital scope three emissions. We're talking about things like the purchased goods and services that you might be using to create your services if you're in a digital industry. So if you have Canva, what the impacts of your tools like Canva or Squarespace or the other kinds of tools that you're paying for, or in downstream emissions, if you have a website, the impact of your website, or if you're offering subscription services, what the impact of those are. So these are the kinds of things that we might be considering in a digital focused sort of scope. So again, as I said a little while ago, sharing the data is extremely important. And this is something that the European Union recognizes. You're going to find that the European Union is quite often well ahead of the United States in terms of requirements and laws and standards. And so when in doubt or when you're trying to be a little ahead of the curve, that is a good place to look. So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is something that's going to go into effect this year and requires reporting on greenhouse gas emissions according to Europe's own standards. In the US, we have some requirements that facilities emitting over 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide must report to the EPA. California, again, is a state that is kind of leading the way. So when in doubt, if you want to push yourself a little further, look for California's rules. Their limit is 10,000 metric tons. Anyone emitting more than that needs to report. And many other countries require reporting as well, typically, again, using the GHG protocol, which is sort of the norm. In the US, there are changes that are afoot. The federal agencies have been required to report annually on scope one and two emissions and to create reduction targets. That was based on an executive order released in November of 2022 by President Biden at the time. There has also been a proposed rule that Biden put out at the same time saying that federal contractors receiving contracts over 7.5 million must share emission and science-based reduction targets for scope one and two, and then those over 50 million must disclose for one, two, and three emissions. This rule was withdrawn as of January of 2025, so this is no longer something that is in the pipeline. I leave it in here to say that if you would like to be a federal contractor, while it may not be something that is a priority with the current administration, it's likely to be something that will resurface as a priority at some point. And it's a good idea to be aware of your scope one and two and three emissions if you do intend to work with the federal government. So what are the major culprits of these kinds of greenhouse gases? Let's take a look at that. Some of the biggest ones, in fact, the biggest one is really end user devices. And this can be an issue too, because what we're looking at here is really for enterprise technology. So these are for businesses. And businesses will often require users to have their own end user device. And of course, oftentimes users already have an end user device of their own. So it may be that we have more than one. In fact, it's quite frequent that we have, maybe a phone, but also a tablet. So we're looking at end user devices being 1 to 2 to 3 times as many as the people that are using them. And then we also have the impact of data centers, of software, and IT services. So we'll break these down a little bit. Again, end user devices are the biggest impact here. And the big impact of this as well, as you can see, is scope three emissions. So these are a lot of the unknowns that we really can only address by having less of them. And then the other big one to look at is data centers. And data centers have much more of the scope 2 emissions, meaning that they require a lot more support just to run functionally, as opposed to the impacts that they have to create or down the line. So data centers are a major culprit. And then finally, a large user of this, in fact, equating almost to the same as end user devices, is the software and IT services that we use. So it may not seem like it's that much to think about just using your computer, but these things add up considerably for output. So again, end user devices, we want to be looking at a few ways to address this. One is a circular consumption model, which we'll talk about in just a moment. We also want to be considering a lifestyle management or life cycle management process. And you can do this for yourself as well as for your business, where you're thinking about how frequently you really need to replace these things. So try to delay that if possible, procure only when necessary. There's a DaaS solution, which is device as a service, where it's possible to purchase a device from a company and replace it on a scheduled routine. So it's similar to software as a service, where you are outsourcing the purchasing and management of that device, but you can typically rely on a company to handle that better, meaning that they will hopefully have reduced costs and will be better at reusing or recycling those devices. You should also have a plan for your e-waste disposal, and your devices obviously should have will have costs, and those are things that you need to be planning for in your organization. So let's talk a little bit about the circular economy. The idea here is that we use a great deal of raw materials for the various products that we create. And we put a lot of work into the design and the production and manufacturing and the distribution. And all of that is impact long before it ever begins to be reused or begins to be used the first time. So oftentimes it's very easy to forget about what is essentially scope 3, the creation, the gathering of raw materials, the time and energy, the work involved in designing, producing, distributing the devices. And then we really have this small window of consumption, use, maybe reuse and repair, which we would like to make as large as possible, especially in comparison to the rest of what is in here, which is collecting. So again, having to travel that device if you need to. And then ideally recycling, because otherwise at this point, it's all just waste. So we would like to see some kind of recycling in here to get back to the point of reusing this device in some way, or the components of the device in some way. I find that this is actually a better example, because it's possible at the point of disposal to either reuse it, so take it back and give it to a new user, or decide to keep it a little bit longer, or hand it off to a friend or a child or something and get more life out of it. Or it's possible to, at the point of disposal, take it back and remanufacture, refurbish it, and then resell it or resurface it, give it new life, or just to recycle it and take it back to the point of energy and material input to build something new. So this circular economy shows the number of ways that we can stop ourselves at the disposal point and repurpose. So lifestyle management essentially has 6 steps. So streamlining your processes, planning for your IT needs and your procurement, acquiring the devices and being very cautious about your planned schedule and budget, deploying and tracking the devices across the organization, supporting them. Again, step 4 is probably, hopefully, the longest window of time in this, where you have the ongoing monitoring and maintenance of your devices, and then refreshing them, either replacing them or finding other uses for them. Again, hopefully returning them to sort of a step 3, step 4, where they can maybe be used again. And then finally, the asset disposal. And it's really a good idea to make sure that you have a plan for the sale, for the recycling, at a minimum, or if you can't recycle, the disposal of the devices. So some of the considerations, obviously, these are really important when you are buying a new device, because there's a lot of impact or potential impact. Is it possible to find a device that uses less energy than what you're currently doing? Is it possible to digitize or consolidate your products? Is it possible to allow your users to just use one device? Is there a way that you can choose a device that uses less waste, or maybe you find a device that is intentionally built out of recycled parts that you can, sort of support that strategy? Is what you're doing going to help your clients or customers to use less energy or to generate less waste? And can it help your customers or clients change their habits? So these are all considerations that we're going to have at several points in our processes. But this is at this point, when you're considering a new device, this is a good place to consider some of these things. So data centers, again, this has a big impact. Remember that by 2030, data centers are projected to consume 9% of electricity. So we really want to be thinking about what is actually being stored. And we have this tendency to imagine our data as this ethereal thing that doesn't actually, it takes space, but we're not concerned about space. Space is cheap, quote unquote. But that's not necessarily the case. There is a lot that comes with our space. So consider that when you are storing these things, not only is that storage filling up, but you're also having to have this content backed up. So in truth, the amount of storage you have is truly at least 2 to 3 times more than that because it's been backed up over and over again. So you really want to start small, go incremental with your file storage, with your device, with your website, and look through and make sure that at a minimum, the spaces that you have things stored in are using green, renewable energy for hosting. And then when you're choosing a service provider, it's a good idea to check and see if the services are, if possible, using green hosting for their services. And there's a link here, and again, it will be in the resources that will help you identify the different hosting solutions that are green. So even if you can't necessarily tell if a service is green, if they're not advertising that, if you can identify where they're being hosted, you might be able to figure out if they are using renewable energy for their site or for their tools. So cloud storage, some of the actions that we can take to improve this: clean out your unused files. This is pretty easy to do, and we have a tendency not to look at this. Avoid duplicating files. This happens a great deal, both in terms of just having multiple copies of a file or multiple versions of a file, or having that file in multiple file spaces. Again, it's pretty easy and a great idea to use a renewable cloud storage provider. Check on their hosting, on your hosting company and how they get their energy. And then the benefits are that you'll have reduced storage costs, reduced clutter, and hopefully reduce security risks as well. One of the tools that you can use to look at some of these things is a company called Karma Wallet. Karma Wallet does a number of things, but it also has a way to compare companies. So you can look, this is a comparison of Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. And here you can see what their climate actions, sustainability, and then also how they treat their people. So community and welfare and diversity and inclusion. And really just doing a little bit of research like this can help you to understand where maybe a good place to put your to focus your energy on or focus your money on. So you can see Microsoft's not bad. Google's actually slightly better. And Amazon is not great. Their community welfare in particular isn't good, but their sustainability is it also needs some work, particularly in terms of their hosting. They do not have renewable energy hosting. So for that reason, maybe you choose to go with Google Cloud Hosting as opposed to AWS. So that's just an example of how we might take a look at these comparisons. Software and IT services. So the size of an average website, 2.4 megs. This was a while ago, actually. And that equates to about 8.5 or 8.85 tenths of a gram of CO2 per page load. And that's not a huge deal until you consider that you maybe have 100 people, or some websites obviously have a lot more than that visiting their site each day, and then it really begins to add up. So some of the things that you can do to design more energy efficient websites: again, make sure that you're using a green hosting provider. Consider the amount of data that you're distributing via each page and the distance it must travel. So, where possible, if you have a CDN and you can deliver from a location that's closer to your user, for some of us, that's not a big deal. For larger organizations or multinational organizations, that can be a huge benefit. Consider having a page weight budget. So, thinking about what the maximum size you want to have of your page would be. Um, you really shouldn't need to have pages that are that large. And I think if you go back and look at the size of some of the content on your pages, you'll be surprised at the sort of weight. Block code and content where possible to simplify it and reuse it. This is a good idea just in terms of efficiency. So, if you're using something like WordPress, which is a content management tool, that is meant to reuse content. So consider the pieces of content that you are putting on your website more than once and put them in a singular place where you can reuse them over and over again. Reduce tracking and advertising as much as possible, or be more discerning about the scripts that you're using that hopefully are more efficient, or consider more privacy and other restrictions, compliances. Consider shorter user journeys. So do you really need to ask all of these questions? Do you need to send the user to another page to do this? Critically examine the user's experience. Again, not just for efficiency, but also for your user's experience. Reduce videos, and please do not autoplay. This can be a very poor experience, particularly for users who have visual or auditory stimulation issues. Where possible, it's better to use flat designs, so reducing the use of gradients or drop shadows, background images. If you are using that, make sure that you're using an image that's right-sized, so don't have the massive 5,000 pixel image in the background. You can load a version that is less than half that size and will be just as efficient. So consider those things when you're building the site. And then again, optimize your images and use vector graphics where possible. So the way that these equate to their impacts, reducing the number of media files and how they're used and the size of them, reducing the amount of JavaScript, optimizing your hosting and site delivery. All these things have tremendous quick benefits. And another one that's very obvious is removing old files. So oftentimes you'll find that if you've had a website for a while, and at this point, many of us have had our websites for quite a while, there's literally thousands of old files in there. And again, for many tools, you'll have several versions of each file. So it can really equate to a massive amount of data that is taking up your web file space. Optimize your assets and your fonts. So make sure that you're delivering your fonts effectively. And then where possible, reduce your content and use simplified design strategies. And all these things can help improve the site load time and your user's experience with your site. And then finally, we have the option to use dark mode. So using dark mode is something that's become more popular, usually with devices, where you can choose to have your phone or your tablet or your computer use a dark mode, which essentially means darker backgrounds, darker displays. It might sound silly, but even just having a bright light, bright white display requires more energy from your monitor, and that just takes more energy overall. So particularly, again, if you multiply that by the number of people looking at your website. So this isn't going to have a huge impact, but using a dark mode or offering a dark mode for your website can be a nice way to improve their experience and also save a little energy. So some of the considerations for your website or service: is it possible to develop it to use less energy than what you currently are? Can you streamline the process of using it and perhaps offer multiple tools or processes in a streamlined way via your site that offloads other requirements? Is it possible to create it in a way that reduces technical debt? So was the site built a long time ago? Maybe it's inefficient at this point, it needs to be rebuilt. Can it generate less waste? Can it help your clients use less energy or generate less waste? Again, looking at things like their dark mode or different things like that? Can it help customers change habits and become more environmentally friendly or environmentally aware? Can it contribute to the circular economy by reducing or eliminating waste? And then remember to collect data from your website in an efficient and upfront manner. So again, trying to collect it with as little overhead as possible and being very clear and compliant, because there are rules about letting your users know what data you're collecting on your website and what it's for. So let's talk a little bit more about that, some of the ethical considerations of using our tech. There are 7 principles in usable design, universal design. And I think you'll agree when I say them that these are very obvious, but they aren't always things that we're thinking about using. And one is that we're building things with equitable use so that the experience for all is the same as much as possible, for flexibility in use so that we can use these websites or have experiences on different devices in different spaces, that our experience with the tools or the websites is simple and intuitive, that we're able to find information easily and that it's where we expect it, that there's a tolerance for error. So if our users are looking for something in the wrong place, are we able to redirect them simply without them going down a deep rabbit hole and having a challenge, being challenging to address the issue or to get back to where they belong? Like, are we providing a search? Are we providing a help page where we can expect them to reach a point of frustration and start to need that help? Is there low physical effort to them using the site, or is it going to be very detailed, very specific? Does it require, um, sort of careful use of physical of your hands and things like that? And then is their size and space appropriate for approaching and using, working with? The approach is meant to talk about universal design from a more physical aspect, but it's also important for things like, is the button large enough for you to push? Is it bouncing around on the page as the page loads? Things like that are also considerations for websites. Another sort of ethical consideration is dark patterns. And these are things that unfortunately we see sort of more and more often. It is often sort of couched as something that is part of marketing, but these are, I think you'll agree, underhanded tactics. So these are things like false urgency, implying a sense of urgency or scarcity. And a lot of us do this even with, like, maybe we have a discount for a certain limited time only. And that's not evil. It's really more when you are, putting in fake urgency or adding an element of criticality that doesn't exist. Cart sneaking is adding items or donations to the cart as part of the process of purchasing something. Um, Confirm shaming is when a user has a choice and they're doing something that you don't necessarily want them to do, and you're essentially shaming them in the text, like saying, I choose to remain unsafe. Product bundling, requiring one product before purchasing another. Subscription traps. This is a really obvious one, making it hard for users to unsubscribe once they've started. Trick wording, intentionally unclear descriptions, or billing surprises like switching to a paid plan without suitable notifications. So these, in many cases, are they're certainly unethical, and in some cases are illegal. But there's other dark-ish patterns. So where you have to pay to play or pay to win, the gamification of content. And this is something that we see, especially in social spaces, that is used a lot for children or adolescents to try to sucker them into using tools. And that's not good, particularly because a lot of these users are not sophisticated enough to identify the manipulation. Infinite scrolling, again, often used in social. So interfaces that make it difficult to find a natural stopping point and shift to another tactic, another space, or another process. Social pressures, adding community obligations or peer comparisons to apply guilt. Random rewards, so adding unexpected rewards in certain targeted places in your experiences with the intent of taking advantage of addictive behaviors. and the notification overload. So oftentimes notifications are on by default, and they've ever increased in numbers. So they generate more emails, which generates, more content on servers, because we don't always remember to delete them. It takes more energy to send those emails, those texts, those push notifications. It's really both overwhelming for the user and is a waste of energy and storage. So it's kind of bad in all forms. And the impacts of well-being on all these things, in many cases, are an unknown. But we know that this overload of notifications and emails and messages and the targeting of user behavior, addictive behavior, is not healthy. And we've certainly seen that for there's definitely data out there that it's impacted adolescents and teenagers. So the real question is, are we prioritizing our long-time user satisfaction or our short-term engagement metrics? And for many of us, we're looking at the marketing data. We want to show that people are engaging, but that may not be the healthy choice, and it's something to consider. So when we're making purchase decisions for our organization, we, again, want to come back to environmental impact assessments. We want to define the key criterias. So this is obviously going to depend on the type of tool or service, but consider who the stakeholders are and the main impacts of what you're doing, and then put a scoring system to look at the values, and that will help you represent your priorities. And then you want to gather the data and evaluate the tool, and then proceed to making an informed decision. So to be fair, this is my own framework. You can change this in any way you want, and it's intended to be flexible, particularly with this step 2 where there's a scoring system so that you can apply your own values. But the goal of this would be to, when you're considering a new tool, be able to pull in the data associated with that tool and then evaluate it based on this matrix. So if we're looking from a technology evaluation specific point of view, we want to look at the energy consumption, the carbon footprint, the resource use, waste management. Sustainability policies really relates to what the company is doing or what information it's making available. And that sort of goes hand in hand with organizational reputation. So if we find that they don't have a lot of sustainable policies or policies in general, that may be reflected more in organizational reputation, where they're not bothering to be transparent about that. And then you can add other factors as you would like. The weight is optional. So in this example, you can see where I'm making energy consumption and the carbon footprint the priorities. And then you would go through and give the tool that you're evaluating a score from, in this case, 1 to 5, and you would add it up for a weighted score. And this would allow you to compare, ideally, to other tools if you were considering several tools for a solution, but also to the other tools that you're using within your organization. And I really want to pause a moment and encourage you, if the tools that you want to use are not coming out on top, this is a key point to reach out to those companies and let them know that they are not meeting your standards. It may seem like this isn't going to make a big impact, but the more we communicate with these manufacturers or these organizations and let them know that they're not meeting our standards and that environmental or ethical or whatever your other priorities are important, hopefully the more they will work on meeting those goals. So this is a really important step. In some cases, the technology is changing just so rapidly that assessing a product is really difficult, or certainly assessing whether a decision that you made a year or two ago is still correct is untenable. And in those cases, we want to put extra weight on the company that's behind the product. So again, you want to consider if their current platforms and hosting are still green. If they were before, hopefully when you made that decision, are they still using green solutions? Are the new tools that they're putting out still meeting those standards, or are they, being created in a way, or are they releasing tools that are important to help you get this kind of data? Is the company putting out impact statements? Do they have a sustainability report? Are they sharing this information? Is transparency important to them, or is it continuing to be important to them? And then again, their track record for their past products and services and the work that they're doing is the work that they're contributing to and the research that they're doing and the tools that they're developing, are these things that are, beneficial for employees and for the environment, or really are they just serving the bottom line? And it's very fair to evaluate at some point that a company that you're working with is no longer meeting the standards that you have. If that's the case, then I would encourage you to consider a new product. And I would also encourage you to be clear and communicate both with your clients and maybe also with the company about why you're not working with them anymore. Letting them know, again, that they are not meeting your standards on things that you believe are important. I think that's a really important step. AI is a really tricky one here. Obviously, this is a great example of something that is changing so rapidly, it's almost impossible to keep up with. The best practices that I can offer are first to use task-specific AI models where possible. These multitask models tend to be more smaller models and very focused on specific tasks. So ideally, they're going to be more effective for your task, and they're also going to be less, I'm going to say, heavy to use. They're going to use a smaller model that doesn't require as much energy. There's energy usage for the models that are out there available on the Energy Star AI project, and this is going to be in the resources. So you can go and check on the energy usage of the models that you prefer and kind of compare with other models. Choose resources powered by renewable energy when possible. So again, you want to see which tools are using or being hosted by renewable energy sources, but keep in mind that some tech companies are really going through this power purchase agreement right now, just basically saying that they're not really renewable energy sources. They're just buying back energy credits, which doesn't undo what they've done. It's just a way for them to sort of pay off their bad habits. So this is another thing to sort of consider. One thing that I would say with this is be encouraged by the companies that are making the investment or putting the work into finding renewable energy sources. For example, both Microsoft and Google are talking about getting nuclear powered data centers, and that is an example of them putting money behind a renewable energy source that's new, sort of pushing the boundaries, building new energy sources. Those are the kinds of things that I think we want to be looking for. And then bring the transparency you want to see. Share the data on the energy consumption of your own tools and let people know, again, when you've made a choice, why you made it. Another good best practice is to create an AI policy for your organization and share that too. So you have decisions and a framework for why you would choose a specific tool. So when the time comes to consider a different tool or change tools, you have your own rules for your organization laid out already. Let's talk a little about making those changes. So the biggest impact areas for IT, number one, the effort to save energy. Number two, the infrastructure choices, device usage, moving to the cloud, and then the energy choices and investing in renewable energy. So the basic choices that we can look at are right-sizing our digital needs. That means making sure that we've paused a moment and that we really need to use the tools that we're using, consolidate where we can, and then optimize the use of devices. Look for energy efficient devices. Try to increase the product lifespan. And then, yes, recycle your devices when you're done with them. There's a number of tools out there that can help you even measure the energy within your own home of things like your monitor or your computer so you can track the usage of that. Um, Increase the use of cloud services. It is going to take space in the data center, but it's going to be more efficient than some other energy sources, and it's going to be backed up. So there are plenty of good reasons to continue to use the cloud. And then put pressure on your suppliers to be using green solutions and green suppliers. Meetings can take a great deal of energy. Obviously, we're still talking about better than driving into the office, but there are impacts to your video calls. If possible, avoid HD video settings. And if you're in a large meeting in particular, stay off camera unless necessary. I know that sometimes that's seen as rude, and certainly if it's a smaller meeting, you should stay on camera. But if it's a large meeting and you're not contributing, there isn't a good reason for that extra bandwidth to be in use. Invite fewer people or invite the right number of people. Consider a traditional phone call, especially if it's something quick. Choose a video conference provider with a commitment to renewable energy. This is something that Google does overall. Their commitment to renewable energy is well known. And then there are some things that you can configure from pretty much any meeting company, including Zoom, for an ECDN, an enterprise content delivery network. And this can help make sure that you're distributing that you're serving the call over the closest network to your users, and as efficiently as possible. Emails and files. It's a really good idea to clean up your inbox. I'm going to say this over and over again. Review your subscriptions. If you see things coming in that you don't need, unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. And if you don't do that, at least delete them. Don't keep these things around unless you really need them, because they're going to stick around for a long time. You won't go back and delete them later, and they're just going to be taking up storage space. So regularly try to go through and delete archived mail, delete and block your spam. Share documents by links instead of as attachments if possible. This is again going to be less weight for sending the document, and then also if you send it to somebody, they have a copy of it on their server as well as you, and that goes for all the people who receive the attachment. So again, this is all taking up space. Clean up stored docs and images if you don't need them, and remember that your files are backed up again, so that digital footprint is at least doubled. Business and personal, seek sustainable shipping and travel solutions. Buy local, buy used, and buy less. Spend less time on your electronics and offer sustainable solutions for your clients or customers. I believe they will appreciate it. Incentivize reuse and recycling for yourself, for your family, for your colleagues, and share your improvements and your goals to inspire actions in others. It can be really rewarding to take that moment and do the math on some of these things, because a lot of these things are very data specific, and it's very easy to get information about the improvements and share those with others. Here's some examples of some hopefully pretty easy swaps. Instead of using Google for search, you can use something called Ecosia, which is a company that is both more data friendly and also plants trees. So this is a sort of a better way, a more environmentally friendly way of doing search. Instead of using Firefox or Chrome, consider something like Vivaldi or Brave. These are browsers that are both can be less heavy to use, require less energy, and oftentimes have better security and privacy rules in place. Where possible, instead of opening more tabs, try to use extensions. There's a lot of extensions out there that will provide pop-ups to do some quick work and then close. Or, for example, I would point to the Perplexity extension that will let you essentially do a search in this pop-up and give you the answer that you're looking for. That's not always going to work for you, but it will also include references so that you can pop open those references if you need to find a specific page, which would probably be one of the results in your search anyway. Again, consider dark mode instead of light mode and refurbished instead of new. And then other sort of quick things you can do, set even just a lower device brightness. If you don't like dark mode, that's fine, but you can probably lower your device brightness. Check on power saver settings and make sure that you have those set. Use smart plugs and power strips. These can really limit the amount of energy that your devices are using. Use ad and autoplay blockers in order to avoid as much annoying pop-ups and information that can be helpful. Bookmark pages, save yourself doing another Google search and just save that page. And then try text-only reading modes in your browser. Sometimes that can be an easier way to get through some content and save yourself a little bit of energy. Now, as I was saying, you can track your data because a lot of times it's it can be pretty easy to find like return on investment for these green metrics. Google and Microsoft, if you're using Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, both of those tools have services to track energy usage. So you can actually see how your energy usage in those platforms has changed over time. You can track the power, of course, for your home or for your specific devices, and then do that and share and incentivize that with your team or your clients, and hopefully everybody will find some improvements there. And then share that with the broader community. Have an annual impact report and let folks know how things are going. So thank you very much for checking in on what we have for your green tech, choosing ethical and sustainable solutions. The link here, merit.digital/resources, has a long list of resources, including all the ones that we talked about in this training, and it's being updated all the time. So I encourage you to check back from time to time for other helpful resources. And at any time, please visit us at meritdigital.com and let us know if you have any questions about your website or the tools that you're using, or would like to offer any resources that you have to us. We'd love to hear about those too. So thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you soon.